Steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict, back with another video. You see here a 62 Lincoln Continental convertible. Definitely a lot to talk about. I think this car is going to appeal to a good majority of folks. It's kind of an untouched car. I want to jump into it. Now, before I do so, I want to reinforce, if we go back to the main page here and we type in Lincoln, and we can type Lincoln Continental or select it here. A recent car that sold that I want to remind everyone is this single family 63 sold for just north of 100,000. So for $105K. Now I had predicted that it was going to go even higher. I think it is worth even more than this. And it's just a hard thing. It just depends sometimes on the color or whatnot. So this car did sell for $105,000, and I think personally that's a very, very strong price. So just wanted to reinforce that. But back to the 62 Lincoln Continental convertible. This car, if we take a look at it here, I want to look at a few photos and then we'll jump into some of the normal presentation that I typically will cover. This is, of course, a blue car. We've got the front three-quarter shot. We see the windows are up. Many folks often like the 61 2s and 3s, have that curved side glass, and you can easily see it here. Typically, these convertible photos will have the windows down, so you don't always get a chance to see the car with the top down and the windows up, if that makes sense. Some of the basic information here, which is typical, it says the Continental is now offered in California with service records, an owner's manual, spare key, and a Montana title in the name of the seller's LLC. For those that don't know, you can go down the bunny trail. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but a lot of folks do register their cars in Montana. There's advantages to that, apparently, depending on the car's worth and I'm sure people's net worths and things like that, but or their assets, but that's a whole nother topic. We see that it is the powder blue paint. They talk about some corrosions noted on the bottom, on the bottom of both front fenders and the rocker panel. So we'll get a chance to see that. Of course, 14-inch wheels for those early 60s. The front suspension was rebuilt in 2011, according to the seller. From what I can tell underneath, that does seem to be accurate. It was originally equipped with blue leather upholstery, and they just have kind of some of the standard things here. We can see, of course, the dash. In 61 only is where they have the hidden air condition vents. And if you haven't had an opportunity on this channel, there's a 62 Lincoln Continental exterior video that I've done. I'm going to eventually do more, but you can watch the 61 and the 62 if you want some of the exterior differences. But when I get to the interiors, eventually I'll talk about how the vents changed in 62, but still I do like these very much so. We can see here, of course, the MEL 430. We have a glimpse under the engine, or under the hood rather, and it looks pretty good. We'll take a look further at some of these photos. One thing to note is underneath this car, as they mentioned, if you look at these bushings and things like that, for the most part, any good mechanic shop can kind of change some of this stuff, but it's nice because not everyone takes the time, resources, and the funds to go buy all of these items, which you can obtain and have them swapped out. So that's great that they did that. 50, 60 years of, those bushings, they do tend to wear out. Now, one thing to note here, they did not break down the VIN like they typically do. So that's something we don't typically see from Bring a Trailer, but fear not, because I'm going to do that. Now, follow me for a moment, okay? I don't want to confuse anyone. This is the 62 we're looking at right now. Currently at 13,000, ends in 6 days. If I go to this tab, this is the 33-year owned 62 convertible that had 150,000 plus, upwards of 200 grand put into this car, okay? And the reason why I want to reinforce this is we're basically going back, give or take, almost a year ago. This car sold for $145,000. So I think one of the key things to reinforce is that this car went for so much because it just had an unbelievable restoration into it. And if you wanted to compare these cars, right, and the differences of like more of a survivor car, which I'll call this, versus a fully detailed award-winning car, you could do so here. The other reason why I wanted to point this out is we're going to look at the VIN tag in a moment, and I want you to see this is what a VIN tag looks like, kind of original, oversprayed or painted over. And you can see here what Bring a Trailer typically does. They'll break this information down, which of course I do anyway, so we'll do that over here on this car. But before we jump into my presentation, let's look at that door plate. And if we scroll all the way down here, the reason why I want to mention this is, again, when these cars, just like my 64, was resprayed, so to speak, in maybe the 70s or 80s at some point. And what will tend to happen is, if you look at this is the way the VIN tag will typically look, right? Body, color, trim. It kind of gives you some of the categories. It breaks down this information. It has the Lincoln Continental, and then you've got your little pieces there where it mounts. Here is what it looks like when, over the course of time, someone resprays the car and, someone sands over it a little bit and whatever. So that's one of those differences. Again, I'm not taking away at all from this car. This happens a lot. I just wanted to be able to show you guys and folks, the viewers, some of what I'm talking about. So if we take a look here in 62, these cars were introduced late 61, so October 12th, 61, based upon what I can find. And we know there were 27,849 sedans. There were 3,212 convertibles for that production year. The 62, I just took this screenshot just a little bit ago. This is some of what we've seen continue to go up over the course of time, including the concourse side of things. But you could see on the lower end, 26,000-ish, all the way up to 122,000 is kind of the Haggerty valuation. The serial number we'll dive into in a moment. To me, I would just kind of sum this up with a couple of words and say it's more of a survivor car. It's not 100% original, and typically these cars aren't going to be, right? Things are going to be changed, tires, belts, all that stuff. But for the most part, I think I'd say a true survivor. It was not registered in the Lincoln registry, so I did submit it, which is something I typically do. Now, looking back, I don't think I review a lot of the 62s, but it's pretty much the same. I think one difference that I notice, because I'm so used to saying H or N, like Nancy, in the VIN number, I forget which years maybe had H, but for some reason I always remember N. But the 2, of course, is for 262. Assembly plant Wixom. 86 is the body style of the convertible. It does have the 430, which is pretty much standard, but again, it's an H here in this VIN. We have it's the 21,291. So built for that model year. If we tally this, there's 31,061. In addition to that, again, this is something that, for whatever reason, Bring a Trailer didn't do this time. It could have just been a minor oversight. But 74A, Lincoln Continental four-door convertible. F is the powder blue. We do, I believe in the description, as well as what we can tell, is it was repainted at some point. 52 is the blue trim interior, if you will. And then 06C, we'll look at the next slide that breaks that down. It is a 50... excuse me, I meant to, this is a typo, 51, you can see here, that is a Denver. I know I always say destination sales office. It's technically a different term. It's destination sales something. It's very something, or district sales office or something like that, but you get what I'm saying. If we look here, 06 is the day of the month, and C is the letter, so A, B, C. We can look at my little grid here. C, of course, is March, or the third month in the year, and this would have been built March 6th of 62. Remember, these cars would have been, the production would have started, I'd say August 61, into mid 62. So remember, they have to start building before that model year to ramp up for it to be introduced kind of in the fourth quarter, if you will, of that year. The pros of this listing, it's an original Survivor car for the most part. The paperwork is showing an engine rebuild in March 11th, 2011. It is a complete car, including the interior and the trunk. It doesn't appear to really be missing anything. It has rear seat belts. It's an AC car. There's a battery disconnect installed already, and there is some exhaust work. It looks solid for the most part underneath the car. Let's take a look at some of these photos, and then we will go over to a couple of the things just to kind of point out. We know it's a 62 because of these longer, what I call rectangles, and very classy front end. 62 is just a great year in my opinion. I know some people will point out in 62 they often went to the slimmer white wall. However, I do believe that I have seen over the course of time that you can you could have ordered these cars with a wider white wall band, and regardless, you'll see these cars with those. So that's obviously easily changeable, if you will. If we take a look here, I know I sometimes even get confused on what trim was installed from the factory on these, because I think at 64 you have the trim here, this piece is here, so some of those things, even me, I have a hard time kind of rattling some of this stuff off, because even though I look at these cars all the time, they kind of blend together in my head. But of course the trim is not here in the earlier years. We can see here the matching. If you watch my 62 video, the aesthetics, I talk a little bit about these longer rectangles on that rear deck lid trim that matches those longer rectangles on the front. That's the easy way to tell a 62 from the back. We can see here, it was not an earlier model, if these are the original badges here, because it doesn't have the longer tail. So we know based upon it being built in March of 62, there was a changeover on the little bit of the tail for the L, which was in 61 for the most part. To me, the bright work looks good. The stance of this car looks correct. A lot of times people will ask, hey, are these cars really this, quote, low from the factory? And yes, this is the way, this is the stance. A lot of times if you look, you'll see that it's almost, it's tucking the tire in the back, but it kind of has that right up to the wheel cover in the back, and it just has that real nice level stance to it. We can see the top is up here, the top is down here, so we do assume the top works well. One of my call outs though is there is not a video of the top or the windows working, so certainly that is going to be something that you would want to question in the comments. I think folks have already kind of asked, and the seller has said, hey, I'm going to be answering some questions, and more than likely he'll post hopefully some videos showing the top operation, which is key just to kind of reinforce, again, if you're looking to spend the kind of money that these cars are going for now, it's nice to be able to say, oh yeah, wow, yeah, the top works, and so on and so forth. We can see here a closer view. Of course, again, this is typically what you're going to see in 62 and 63 for the rear badging, with the L kind of a little shorter than what it was in 61. We can see here, this is a key area to look at, where the deck lid is at, and then kind of the shaping around here, because when this car was resprayed, there are a couple areas on it, such as this, and it's hard to tell, like, if there is body filler there, also known as what most people just quote and say Bondo. These were some suspect areas, being that this was a Denver car or DSO. It's hard to tell, like, hey, did it have an existence where it was mostly indoors and not in the winter? I would assume, based upon seeing underneath the car. But obviously there are some areas like this. This isn't anything to be necessarily worried about, but just know, it's sometimes difficult to kind of know what did the folks that did the body work on this car potentially, right? If it just wasn't a quick respray, was it perfect underneath? And a lot of times you just won't know. Certainly, I don't think this car looks bad at all. I love blue, like I've always said, and this is a car I would potentially go after if I was looking for one. We could see here kind of the trueness of the decals / paint on the rear deck lid trim. some of the differences in 61 to 62, obviously, but I think 62 to me stands out personally as more of my favorite year versus 61. You can buy these new pieces here. These are obviously replaced, I would say, and you can see it's not perfect here, but these are a little bit tough when you're fitting that lens in there to get that to fit perfect to the body. I've just had some issues, but mostly with the original ones myself. 62, of course, we still have the antenna on the rear driver's side. That's what you're seeing there. And then, of course, they're doing a good job of showing all the little minor imperfections. A lot of times this can be polished. If there's dents and dings, you can have all that removed if you want to take the car to that level, but certainly you don't have to. This is an area you always want to look at as well in the front and rear, the kind of the fenders and the dog leg areas. It's hard to tell if there's really anything under there, but certainly if this car was resprayed, 20 plus years ago, I think it looks pretty good overall. I know I'm going through some of these photos a little fast. I'm just trying to kind of keep these efficient so that they don't run too long. What I will say here about the interior is I love it. I love this kind of originality. I would assume that the seats are original, and the carpet has been changed, which I call that out and one of the key call outs on it. These seats, you could typically make them, if you want to spend some time with some Griot's Garage products, you can make them look really, really nice. The gas pedal here, for the most part, to me, looks really good. It's usually a kind of a tell on how much a car has been driven. And, you can see there's a little bit of wear on it, but it's not too bad. Someone has added a toggle switch here. We don't know what this is for. I do not believe it's called out anywhere, but certainly, it could be, pretty much anything, I would say. We can see it does have front and rear seat belts, which is good. And again, they're showing a lot of the close-ups here. Now, you may ask, how do we know it's not the original carpet? Because it does look original. My assumption is that at some point this was changed. There is not a heel pad over here with a Lincoln, not insignia, but there's a typical heel pad that you'll see in these cars, and this one does not have it. Kind of the trueness of showing some of the interior pieces here. I talked to Chris Dunn at Lincoln Land before about this. I'm a big fan of these kind of wood pieces in these earlier Lincolns. And, if you add up the amount of pieces that there are, there's about 10, I think, individual pieces. And what I want to do is try to go back to the dash photo here. Maybe this is a good one, but you basically have one, and I think you could call this like 2, 3, 4, because these are individual pieces, 5, 6, and then you have one on each door panel. So then there's 4. So that's your 10 pieces there. There are, I believe, companies that remake those pieces, especially these. But to me, I'm just a fan of the originals. When we look here at the ashtrays, yes, that was a thing back in the day. You see that it does have the cigarette lighters in there. A lot of times folks will change these out for like USB ports. If you've got kids or grandkids that are riding in the back, they could plug in their phones. There is a little bit of work that has to go with that. But the point that I'm pointing out is the fact that the stuff is there. Including if you look at the trunk, to me, everything is there for the most part. It may not be perfect, and these pieces over the course of time will get a little bit damaged, but certainly it's all there. I had to be reminded that in 61 2s and 3s, the deck lid weather stripping is on the deck lid itself. It's not on the body. In 64, it's moved from the deck lid itself to the body, and that's something that I wanted to make sure that everybody knew, because I tend to get that kind of confused. In the engine bay, we can see it does have the battery disconnect. We see, I talked recently about where the coil is at. The coil here is up underneath the expansion tank, which is kind of annoying. So people do tend to relocate this, but this is original. We can see it has the original master cylinder. It has the 3-port fuel pump, and there is a closer photo of the fuel pump here. Now, on my car was pretty original, and I want to show you this little clamp here where you put the pliers. My car had pretty much all of these original. I believe here this was original for this spot. I've changed some of these out. I mean, I'm not saying this would ever leak, but over the course of time, you won't see a lot of these left. And but I don't see any leaking, and I think that's fine. It does look like it has a newer clutch fan on it, which will be key because this is an AC car. And the last couple of photos, again, I always talk about, looking underneath. Again, I think to back up the front being redone, you do see some newer bushings here, which is great. This isn't typically painted. It seems like more than likely at some point, probably when the engine was rebuilt, which we'll look at that invoice in a moment, someone maybe came in here and painted this. I've never necessarily seen this other than black, and this does look like it was detailed a little bit, which is fine, but I wanted to kind of call that out. And, some of this where this paint is cracking a little bit, you could always get in here and do some POR 15 or something to kind of seal it up if you wanted to get that crazy with it. Underneath the car, again, you see a little bit of, shininess here, but it doesn't look like anything has even really been, nobody's got underneath this thing with a whole can of undercoating to try to hide anything. It's all true. The exhaust looks like it was redone probably not that long ago, which is great because you can spend $1,000 to $2,000 easy on exhaust. The last thing I want to hit upon is, before we look at some of the key callouts, if we look at this invoice is 3/11 of 2011. There's a few small minor things here, but it's a master kit premium, so $1,500. And if you look at this stuff here with the machine work and what was done, the engine was basically rebuilt. Now, whether it needed to be rebuilt or not, that's something we don't know, but I can tell you these engines are very strong, and when you rebuild them, you're basically making it brand new. And if the person knows what they're doing, this was, $3,400 back 13 years ago. So the engine on my 64 has been rebuilt, and I would say that this engine is probably very, very strong. There's only a couple of videos. I'm not going to necessarily show those. The thing I will tell you is, in this video, the car is running as the person does a walk around, okay? I want to remind people, do not leave these cars running without your foot on the brake, because if the steering column has not been rebuilt, and I've talked about this, there's a video on my channel about it, these cars can and will fall into, often referred to as jump into, they can fall into reverse. And if they do, and there's someone back here, they can get ran over. This car, if it were to fall into reverse, it could easily, kind of take off and slam into this and damage the car. So trust me, I know this. Anybody that's been around Lincolns will tell you this can and does happen. And it's just an unfortunate thing. It's not just Lincolns, it was other Fords as well. And there's a couple of videos overall. It's hard to tell if the engine is a little loud with a potential exhaust leak, but what we can tell in this invoice is there was a new exhaust manifold for $329. So there might have just been one, maybe the other side is leaking now. That can usually be remedied with a Remflex gasket, which is a thicker gasket, or a new exhaust manifold on the other side. But it is kind of hard to tell in the video if it is leaking a little bit. If we jump back over here and close this out, I know this video's went a little longer than some of them. The key callouts is the carpet doesn't have the heel pad. As I mentioned, you can always get a new carpet kit from Jim Wallace. And if you don't know who Jim Wallace is, you can Google Jim Wallace Lincoln Interior. This will take you to his Google website. And he's the guy on eBay that sells all of these different kits and whatnot. And he sells these carpet sets. You can see here where it has the heel pad, and it does have the Lincoln insignia right there. But these carpet kits run like $500 to $1,000, and he kind of shows here. I think he has the original mold of these heel pads. So Jim's a good guy. I haven't necessarily bought anything from him yet. I own some things that came from him, but he's here in Florida, and he's a good guy, and he's been doing this for a long time. It has the single master reservoir, which I mentioned. I would upgrade that to the dual reservoir. Do the windows and top work with little to no issues. I think this could easily be remedied if he does a couple of short videos, and even if he posts them. Bring a Trailer is great about adding those into the kind of the gallery, so to speak. But we really need to see if the windows go up and down. Are they super slow? More than likely they're going to need a little bit of attention. Do the rear auto drops work? Kind of the same thing. When you go to open that rear door, does the window drop? And then when you close the door, does the window go back up, right? So those are some key things. And again, being very... I would say transparent is, those are the type of things I would ask if I was looking to buy this car. I love blue Lincolns. I love the color powder blue. I think it's great. I think someone's going to get a real nice kind of true car. And my guess on the price is going to be, I'm going to guess 60 to 73,000 it's going to go for. I do think potentially these cars are worth more than that, but it's just kind of what we've seen in some of the market. I think if it was black, it would appeal to even more people because people often want a black Lincoln, but I'm of the mindset of we've got enough black Lincolns. Let's go with some other kind of 60 colors, and I wouldn't change this one really at all, in my opinion. If you like what I'm doing here, please leave a comment, consider subscribing. Stay on the rise.